Okay, hello everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking the UNSW Socratic Society for hosting tonight's event. So my name is Ethan, and I will be arguing against the idea that consuming the flesh of animals is morally permissible. So using reason, I will show that accepting this position either leads to contradiction or results in absurdity. Now, just in case you're not familiar with the processes involved in bringing animal products to the table, I'll just give you the tip of the iceberg. So this involves macerating male chicks at birth on their first day of life because they cannot lay eggs, separating baby calves from their mothers so that we can take their milk, and eventually bulk gunning these animals to death once they reach slaughter weight for their flesh. Now, allow me to walk you through a simple thought experiment. The first question I'll ask you to consider is whether you support the practices I just described. Now, this should be easy. If you eat animal products, then the answer is necessarily yes. Next, let's consider a hypothetical scenario. Suppose the animals subjected to these conditions were replaced with humans. Would we still consider these practices acceptable? I'll make an outrageous assumption here and assume the answer is no. But this raises an interesting question. Ask yourself this: what is true of the animals that, if true of a human, would justify treating the human in the same manner? What is that trait? For surely there must be a trait. If one were to argue there is no trait, then we could swap every single feature of the human until they're identical to an animal, and we would reach a logical contradiction, that it both is and is not the case that it's acceptable to kill that being. It also cannot be every trait, as this would entail it being acceptable to inflict these practices upon a human with merely one cell of cow DNA, a view I assume nobody in this room holds. So, I'll repeat the question for clarity. What is true of the animals that, if true of a human, would justify treating a human in the same manner? So let's start off with a common answer: intelligence. If this is the proposed trait, would it then be acceptable to subject a human with the intelligence of an animal to the same practices of abuse and slaughter? If you answered no, then that's a logical contradiction. If the answer is yes, we have reached absurdity. So consider another common answer: species. I'll go with the standard definition, which is a group of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Okay, so it may seem far-fetched, but if I turned out to be a different species, would it be acceptable to bolt gun me in the head? I sure hope not. And if you answered yes to such a question, then please keep your distance. So my opponents in this debate have seemingly named their own traits, which seems to be animals are not able to be reasoned with or communicated with. But we can equalize that too. So just imagine a set of humans who lack this capacity. Like animals, they can only move around, feel and express pain, form friendships, solve basic problems and recognize faces. But they can't talk or think beyond a certain capacity. Now, if the opposing team wants to remain consistent and say it's acceptable to put these beings to death, then I'd say they've done my job for me. I get to say I wouldn't kill them because I'm a vegan. They have said that it would be limited to species, and while I would say they've done a nice job like noticing that species is a correlate of this trait, it doesn't escape the logical extensions of their view. So practical reasons aside, they're still committed to eating the disabled. Now, I've asked this question possibly hundreds of times, and I'm yet to find a single compelling answer. When asked to name the trait, people repeatedly contradict themselves or hold to absurd conclusions. There's only one way out of this idea: to abandon the idea that non-human animals lack moral value such that we can slaughter them for mere pleasure. So now that you understand veganism on an intellectual level, let me give you a little motivation to take action. Because the truth is, when people witness how animals are treated in these industries, they don't need a philosophy lecture to tell them it's wrong. the real barrier to veganism isn't ethics, it's the perceived difficulty. And I'd go so far as to say that if nobody in this room thought that it would be difficult to be vegan, we probably wouldn't be having this debate. But anecdotally, I went vegan at age 14. I'm 24 now. I was the only vegan in my family. I barely knew how to make toast without setting the kitchen on fire. And yet, nearly a decade later, I've managed just fine. Today, with unlimited information at the tips of our fingers, it has never been easier to be vegan. Throw a couple tofu TikToks in your nightly doom scrolling session, and I'm sure you'll find your way. But even if I didn't deny the difficulty, I would say this. If there is ever a time to do that which is hard, it is surely when the lives of Earth's most innocent beings are at stake. Lastly, consider the practices outlined at the beginning of this speech. This happens in free range, organic, what have you. But who here would turn on a blender full of male chicks for a carton of eggs? Who here was outraged when just weeks ago an influencer went viral for taking a baby wombat from its mother? Would it have been acceptable if they did that to steal their milk? And who here would put a bolt gun up to the head of an animal and pull the trigger, merely for a steak? If you wouldn't, then you should be vegan. Thank you. Any other questions?